Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I wish I was in Cairo with you all. So please do forgive my absence in person, but I've been listening very keenly. I hope you can see the presentation. And it's a very hard act to follow Brian Kagaro, who is a dear friend and comrade in the ecosystem. Shout out to Becky Moyo and all the friends in the room. I'll try to do this in 10 minutes, just to do share a few thoughts with you. And if you cannot hear me, please do shout out a chat. So my name is Ndidi Nwuneli, as been mentioned. I'm the CEO and president of the One Campaign. For those in the room who don't know One, we're a global advocacy organization that fights for a more just world by demanding the investments needed to create economic opportunity and healthier lives in Africa. And our vision is that Africa is an equal player. And like many of you in the room, we're really charged by the changes that need to be made in our ecosystem. We recognize that many of us have been at the forefront of these battles, fighting alongside One, fighting alongside many, many other activists, committed change agents, and social innovators to have made some progress. And I think it's important that we recognize that there have been declines in child mortality, there have been declines in maternal mortality. The life expectancy is gradually increasing. We've seen some shifts that are positive. Not all our shifts have been negative, but they are critical issues. And with the geopolitical shifts, the traditional partners cutting back, shifting from development to defense spending, the public sentiments in Africa and around the world deepening for my family and country first before my neighbor, and the trade wars. There are real vital changes happening. Many, many countries have cut their giving, and we see this across the board. We see only a few countries committed, but most countries are down to 0.2 or 0.3% of GDP to giving. However, when we look at all the regions of the world, I mean, as an African committed to change and a social entrepreneur who has built about 6 organizations on the continent and helped create about 20 that are thriving, it breaks my heart to see that we're the only region of the world that still has rising poverty levels. It's unacceptable. As Brian said, it's unacceptable, as the previous speakers have said. And for me, when we dig into the issues, we have 30 plus countries spending more on debt servicing than on health. We have our countries spending more money, leaving the country to pay for debt repayments than what is coming in. I think in 2023, we saw that African nations were spending about $43 billion in debt repayments. And at that time, about 42 billion was coming in to the continent for development. We're the only region of the world that still has such high out-of-pocket expenses for health, for education. Only about 1.5% of our GDP in most of our countries is spent on health financing. And I can go on, and you know the statistics more than I. But this chart in particular makes me upset whenever I think about it, because with the cuts that have come from the flattening of USAID, from the reductions in spending from most countries, we are the only region that's still dependent on external funding for our own health. And health is not a development agenda. Healthy workforce means that we have a workforce that can drive growth. So it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call for us. Brian has said Santa Claus is not coming. Now, when we think about where the money is on our continent, and I think it's important just to spend a bit of time on this chart, 250 billion is in public development banks in Africa. 455 billion is in pension funds. And Brian mentioned pension funds. I want to underscore $455 billion is in pension funds. African wealth sovereign funds, 150 billion. Remittances, 100 billion. Just from 2023, and some countries say that this has doubled. African high net worth individuals who keep money abroad, 2.5 trillion. Illicit financial flows, 88.6 billion. And this is our money stashed in Swiss bank accounts or in bank accounts in different European countries or in Singapore now. If we were able to reform our MDB balance sheets, it would unlock 500 billion. If we're able to address the credit rating idiosyncrasies that continue to put an unfair risk premium on Africa, where we pay too much for financing, we've estimated it at 75 billion. If we're able to leverage SDRs, which is special drawing rights, It's 1.5 billion. And if we're able to reduce our remittance costs, and we talked about this, Brian mentioned remittance cost is 20 billion over 10 years. So they're real sources of capital. The money is not the problem. The question is how we are allocating the money, for what purposes, to what causes. We realize that domestic resource mobilization is the only way out. We cannot be dependent on any other world region. This has been resonated by many, many people who say, aid is a thing of the past, and we must start to think about it and focus on attracting investment and mobilizing our own domestic resources. That's just Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. And King Adeshina says, we cannot depend on the benevolence of others. Benevolence is not a strategy. Investment is a strategy. And we have articulated a very robust way out in Agenda 2063 by African Development Bank. However, we're not implementing it. And that's the challenge. When I look at Agenda 2063, it's robust and it has a comprehensive framework with different mechanisms. Unfortunately, most of them are failing or not being implemented. So at the One Campaign, when I came in very early on in our tenure, we saw this trend. We saw that giving was at a 50-year low. And we said, how can Africans take care of our own health financing? And what was we do? And we're doing the same for other sectors, but we started with health. We realized that we have to have some fundamental principles. Africans for Africa. Health as a critical driver of national, regional, and continental growth, not as a black hole, not as a development indicator, but as a growth indicator. And that we must redefine what health means for Africans, not replicating health systems in other parts of the world. And this, for me, is critical because for every development agenda, it's what works for Africa. And this is an opportunity where we have to redesign. And so we've come up with what are the indicators we'll judge countries by: maternal mortality, under 5 mortality, life expectancy. And that we can't just think about health as basic health care, but clean water and nutrition, which are critical for all the components, but also how we prepare for pandemics. And we did look at the gap. We said, if the gap is $50 billion that has been cut, how can we fill it? Where are the sources of growth that we can unlock? So we looked at efficient and effective systems. How can we remove the corruption in our systems as they exist? In some countries, by digitizing, in embracing technology and innovation, we can reduce costs by 20 to 50%. How can we generate more revenue? What about sin taxes? Taxes on carbonated soft drinks, on alcohol, on tobacco in our countries? What about unlocking the workforce for the future? AI for health, clinical trials, but also getting countries like Germany to pay for healthcare workers, which they're already starting to do, but paying too little. Germany pays about $1,000 for healthcare workers from Kenya, for example. However, we know that NHS and other health systems will shut down if Africans were not there, if the Zambians and Nigerians were not working. So how can we get compensated and produce the health workforce for the future and the care workers for the future when the rest of the world has an aging population? What about remittances and diaspora funds? Can we unlock them? What about debt for health swaps and debt restructuring linked to school feeding and other nutrition initiatives? And how can we reform the global health infrastructure? This is Gavi, Global Fund, WHO, UNAIDS, and ensure that they transfer procurement and production to Africa and data. And Brian talked about data as well. So we mapped this out with stakeholders from across Africa. And now we're starting to implement, partnering with Africa Philanthropy Forum to mobilize $500 million that goes directly to local organizations, ensuring that we're partnering with remittance providers that take 0% fees, because this money is saying they've been cut. HIV/AIDS clinics are having to shut down. Organizations that provide healthcare for our citizens are having to shut down. That's unacceptable. I refuse to be quoted as a CEO who says 5 million African children are going to die because USAID has been flattened. I want to say how many millions have lived because Africans took this agenda forward and filled the gap. And we've been talking to stakeholders. We've talked to the Africans at Microsoft. They're very excited. Most companies match and triple match. We've talked to the Africans at JP Morgan Chase, and the list goes on. And we're mobilizing diaspora across the world to say, invest in your own villages. That healthcare center in your own village, instead of paying for funerals, pay to keep people alive. We're also running forward in partnership with the Global International Insurance Forum to launch Health Bridge, which is a remittance provider framework for diaspora to pay for health insurance for their villages, for their relatives. Instead of paying for emergency healthcare for a relative who wants to deliver a baby, And we're so excited about launching this. And at Onga, we're going to be having a 17 rooms initiative. Anyone who's interested in this insurance platform should please join us. And it's really just a gateway to really ensure. Right now, only 16% of Africans are insured for health. We want to increase that to 30%, partnering with the diaspora. And I could go on and on and on. We really believe that unless we address the fundamentals of the financial infrastructure, we cannot unlock domestic resource mobilization. So one is using this year as African Union hosts the G20 and South Africa hosts the G20 to take on this issue of the cost of capital. We pay 500% more than our counterparts for debt. Domestic investments, private equity, venture capital, growth capital, and this is unacceptable. So we're dismantling the barriers that really unlock the potential here. And this is key. And we're also using every opportunity to change narratives about Africa, because we must change our own narratives within our continent and global narratives that Africa is not a risk. Africa is an opportunity. Africa is the investment.
They say Africa is risk. Interesting. But stay with me. You mean Lagos, where fintech rises before the sun? Or Joburg, where Charles LeBron didn't walk? Or Dakar, where rhythm breaks the rules? Risk? No. This is return. Return on belief. On the girl in Enugu sketching dreams which are cool. On the boy in Soweto coding futures from a shared laptop. And a Nigerian musician making dreams from a stolen laptop. On the market woman in Kumasi who knows profit without spreadsheets. On justice. For once. We know how to build with bruises. Remix scarcity into rhythm. We stretch coins into companies, our sweat, blood, and bodies. We take what the world throws away and say, not so fast, Abiku. We reinvent. You still don't get it. This is not aid. This is alignment. You don't donate to us, you partner, or you get left behind. Because the continent moves quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. So your hesitation is your loss. Because what we call hustle, you call innovation 20 years later. We are not waiting for green lights. We are building roads on red. We are not fragile. We are anti-fragile. Our wounds became weapons. Our delays became data. Our waiting made us wise. Africa doesn't need your charity. Africa is your clarity. On where the future breathes. On where the world resets. On where value multiplies like cassava after rain. So if you fear risk, don't come. But if you're looking for a return, on imagination, on resilience, on tomorrow, welcome. Welcome to Africa.
So that's one example of how we're changing narratives. We had
They say Africa.
We had something similar in Africa Day all over the world. I was in the US Africa Day where we had something at the Congress, and we had a return on investment image to say Africa is not a black hole, it's an opportunity. But we need political will, we need data, we need transparency, and we need champions because we cannot make this happen on our continent. I have built many organizations, and one of the ones I'm most excited about is Wealth for Impact. And I just want to underscore that in addition to all the great networks we have, and I applaud all those in the room who have built out philanthropy, we still have individuals who do not know where they stand on the philanthropic landscape. And so we're helping families, early stage families, structure their giving. And to ensure that as they're generating wealth, they're also thinking about like long-term impact. And there will be people sitting in the rooms in future for the Africa Philanthropy Forum, Africa Philanthropy Network. And we've already started helping families quietly because they don't want to be known over the last 3 years, because we need African philanthropists who fill the gap. So as I round up, I just want to say that for me, I would really appeal to you coming out of this session to realize a sense of urgency. We must, as Africans, think differently. We must invest in our own resources, and we must invest in domestic resource mobilization, growth, and catalytic capital. But we need our philanthropists to recognize their roles as catalysts, investing and addressing wicked problems, pooling resources, and investing in local organizations and system change. We need philanthropists to stand in the gap on elections and democracy and the rule of law. Those wicked problems Brian and others take on, we need local Africans standing the gap. We need civil society to lead by example, building strong, transparent, and accountable organizations. Planning for their succession, leadership succession, has been a bane of our civil society, especially for social innovators, investing in the next generation and holding our governments accountable. And we need to partner with private sector to scale local solutions that drive impact. I'll tell you that for me at one thing that has struck me in this last 15 months or 16 months I've been here is the challenge that many of us have ceded space in building bridges to the rest of the world. And Africa must be recognized as an equal player. And I'll end with one of the quotes that keep me going. It's an Igbo quote that says, Mbelede kaja madike. It's during times of crisis that you know who is resilient, who's innovative, and who's brave. It's during times of crisis that we know who is resilient, innovative, and brave. And I think sitting in this room today are people who are ready to rise up to the challenge, to think differently, to challenge the status quo, to grow our continent, to change narratives, and to ensure that we leave this continent better than we found it for future generations. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.